What is going on, everyone? Darkside Phil here, and welcome to another edition of the Hateful Truth video game review series, where I give you maximum truth and minimum bullshit, and I give you the actual truth about the games, rather than that biased nonsense that you get from the mainstream media more often than not these days. So today we are going to talk about a game that I'm excited to do this review, okay? Because it's one of the few games where I've actually played the original, and now I've played the direct sequel, and I can give you that unique perspective of, gee, did they improve this? What did they do here? What did they do here? And it was a game that I think a lot of people were anticipating, pretty hyped, pretty big. And of course we were talking about the action-style beat-em-up game, Prototype 2, okay? Now, Prototype 2, in a lot of ways, is extremely similar to the original Prototype, and sometimes it's a great thing, sometimes it's not such a good thing. But what I want to warn everyone is that there are going to be some minor story spoilers in this review, because actually one of the major points that I want to make is revolving around something that happens in the story that I was a little disappointed with, okay? So I do want to warn everyone, if you want absolutely no spoilers about the game, obviously don't watch the review at all, but if I'm going to give you a story spoiler, I'll say spoiler alert, and you can just skip a couple seconds ahead, okay? So, Prototype 2, this time around focuses on a brand new character called Sergeant James Heller, who is the main protagonist of the game. And we pick up about a year after what had happened in Prototype 1, okay? And basically after that original infestation or infection that had gone throughout the city and killed thousands, it was contained, it was finally controlled, okay, after the events of Prototype 1. And so in Prototype 2, James Heller basically comes back from war. He's a soldier. Comes back from war to find that his wife has been murdered and his daughter is missing. And he directly blames Alex Mercer, who was the actual protagonist of the first Prototype. Because the media, what they're being told in their skewed view of everything, is that it was Alex Mercer who had actually caused this infection of the city and killed his wife and basically, you know, his daughter, who he believes is also dead. Because he can't find her, basically. And there is a second infection now that is infecting New York City. So once again, it does take place in New York City, okay? And what ends up happening early in the game, so spoiler alert, but early in the game, James encounters Alex Mercer, gets infected by him, and actually gains powers similar to what Alex has. And at first it's unclear why exactly he was given those powers. As the story progresses, some twists and turns happen. You find out that Alex actually wants you to team up with him, and so on and so forth. I don't want to spoil the story because it really does kind of give you a couple twists in there of, you know, gee, what's going on? Is Alex the bad guy? Is this military group Black Watch, are they the bad guys? Because they were basically the main villains of the first game. It's very unclear as what exactly is going on, who is the bad group in the game, okay? So as you go throughout the game, you're going to basically have an open world environment that you can explore. And this is pretty neat because, similar to the first Prototype, there are a lot of things right off the bat that you can do. You can start to climb buildings really quickly. You jump really high. You can start to experiment with your hover and your basic combat abilities that you have at the beginning of the game. But you can also do some of the open world missions. And what I mean by that are, there are certain things like called black boxes hidden on dead soldiers throughout the city. And you only find them as you get close to them. You have like a radar that detects them, and then you have to try to use this tracker, this GPS tracker, to find these black boxes, okay? Every black box gives you experience and unlocks a little bit more of the story, or side story as well, or a little bit more background to the characters of the main story. In addition to that, there's some missions that are called RadNet missions. Now these are missions that if you bought the game, or if you, I believe it's if you reserved the game, or you bought the limited edition of the game, I'm not positive, but basically what it is, it's a group of challenge missions that changes over time. So when I was playing the game during the first 2 days of launch, it was one mission where you had to run from building to building and get from point A to point B within a certain period of time, hitting certain checkpoints along the way, and you got bonus experience and such for completing this mission. There was another mission that I believe was a combat mission where I had to jump and kill a certain amount of enemies with a ground pound attack. Now that was only the 2 missions for the first 2 days. After the first 2 days that this game was out, those missions actually changed, and it was a whole new set of missions. So by doing those missions you get bonus experience, but you also unlock some pretty cool things such as an Alex Mercer skin. You can look like him while you play the game, which is pretty neat. But outside of that open world aspect, the game does have several story missions that obviously are mandatory for you to complete the story. Sometimes it breaks apart and branches out where you don't have to necessarily do one mission before another. You'll have a choice between multiple missions that you can do, similar to how it's been done in Grand Theft Auto before, how it was done in Infamous before. But then there are other side missions as well. There are layers, which are underground bases where infected are basically taking over, and you have different missions there. Sometimes you have to just kill certain enemies, sometimes you have an objective you have to complete. Completely optional, but again, they'll give you bonus experience if you do complete them. So over the course of the game, what's going to happen? Well, you're going to level up your abilities, and depending on what you want to do, you can really have your character become a different kind of build. For me, I wanted to do a build where he was super fast, he could jump super high, and he was basically a master of transportation. If he needed to get from point A to point B, he could fucking haul ass and do it super quick, because I knew that was going to help me within the course of the game and it wouldn't drag along, okay? But there are things that you can focus on combat where you can keep upgrading certain abilities if you like your claw ability over some of the other ones that you get during the game. And there are a variety. You get claws, you get a blade arm, which is actually what they show right here in the main promotional art for the game. You get a whip arm, you get boulders on your hands that allow you to pound things. You get shields that allow you to block and counterattack during this melee combat. And each one has a unique feel, okay? Each one have unique abilities that you can buy with your experience points. For example, the whip has the ability to whip out and latch onto a vehicle like a helicopter and pull it down and destroy it, okay? As opposed to maybe the blade might have a different kind of special slashing attack. It's a spinning slash that it could charge up. So every weapon that you acquire during the course of the game has some unique abilities. Now, what I would like to say is I think that the pacing of these abilities is excellent. There's never a time during the game when you feel like, man, this is boring. I've been using these same abilities for hours on end, and it's repetitive because you're constantly leveling up, you're constantly improving your build, and then during certain key story points of the game, you get new weapons. You might, oh, I finally got the blade arm. Use that for a couple hours, and all of a sudden, oh, I got the whip arm. Now I can use that. And it really is interesting to try out all these new things, and it always keeps the combat usually fresh, okay? I do like to say that. Even though it is just a lot of melee combat, I have to say the combat does stay fresh with all the abilities that you're constantly unlocking throughout the course of the game. There are also some other abilities that you can level up. For example, the ability to instantly kill a vehicle, which is extremely useful, and I recommend to anyone that you should get it if you can get it. I think it's called like Finisher, because then you don't have to worry about hitting the vehicle repeated times with other abilities. It actually can make one of the abilities, I think it's called Rock Fist or Boulder Fist, completely like not even useful anymore, because you can just kill the vehicle instantly. You don't need to use that ability, which is good against vehicles. In addition to just the melee combat, there is the stealth aspect of the game as well, returning from Prototype 1. And what I mean by that is you have the ability to basically absorb people, okay? So if you need to get into an enemy base for whatever reason, you can sneak up behind one of the guys who has access and absorb him and become him. You become basically a clone of him, and now you have the ability to use the facial recognition scans or the palm scans to get into this secure base and get the data you need, or maybe possibly kidnap a scientist or do whatever you need to do. And this is a unique aspect of the game because it allows you to play the game differently. You don't have to always solve problems by destroying everything. Instead, you can sneak up and absorb people. And the way that it works in this game is that the game will tell you whether or not you can absorb people. Basically, no one has to be looking at you. You have to be completely like in a corner, or maybe you're not within line of sight of certain people, okay? And some cases this works really well. I think it's unique because you can say, gee, how do I trick this guy into going into a corner so that I can, absorb him? In other cases, it's really fucking silly. So, for example, sometimes you'll just walk up behind one guy and absorb him, okay? Because he was on here's maybe a group of 10 dudes. He was the guy in the background, so you get him. Then you walk up to the next guy, absorb him, absorb him, absorb him, absorb him, absorb him. Next thing you know, they're all absorbed into you. After the first 5 guys vanished, don't you think someone in the group would have said, gee, where did half of our group go? So that is kind of silly. The AI is kind of silly in that regard. Also, there are basically really big ways you can abuse this engine. For example, I needed to absorb a certain scientist inside of a lab while staying undercover, but there was this big muscle dude in like armor that was staring straight at him. So what did I do? Let's say this was the guy. I walked against him the guy who was looking at the scientist I needed to absorb, and it basically pushed him off the screen like this. Just by walking against him, he didn't notice I was walking against him. I pushed him away, and then I was able to absorb the scientist that I needed to absorb. So obviously, not very realistic in that regard. And another major reason that you would want to absorb the people and look like them is for stealth. So for example, maybe you commit a crime, or you're fighting these troops as James Heller, and so now everyone knows what you look like. Oh, this guy just showed up, and James Heller was here and attacked us. Well, you can jump away, start trying to run away, and then after you turn a corner and you're out of their line of sight, you can morph into the last guy who you absorbed, and then they don't realize that it's you. So once they turn that corner, they think that they've lost you. So it's a critical way to run away from enemies and for stealth. However, even there, that's kind of broken too, because there are really silly parts. Like, you'll look like a scientist, and you'll drop 5 stories off the top of a building and land into a group of troops, and they'll all look at you like this, like they'll be alerted a little bit, but they don't think that just because how did that scientist drop off the roof of the Empire State Building? That's perfectly fine. He must not be James Heller. So it's kind of weird. Like, they don't, they're alerted a little bit, but they're not, oh shit, it's him. They're just like, and if you just stand still for a second, they walk away. So really weird that you could just like drop in amidst a group of troops, and for whatever reason they don't realize, oh god, it's the guy who morphs and kills everyone. So really odd. So let me tell you about stuff I liked about the game and stuff I disliked about the game. I definitely liked the variety of combat. I really like the fact that, unlike a lot of these games where you start out and you feel like a weakling, you really feel powerful from the get-go in Prototype 2. You're using your powers, you're super jumping, you're hovering, you're flying throughout the city, crawling up buildings. You really feel like you are a super-powered brute. And it actually makes the game feel great. It makes, wow, I'm powerful, I'm having fun, I can fuck these guys up. Now don't get me wrong, unless you're upgrading your health a lot, which I did not do early on in the game, you actually take a lot of damage from enemies. So you're going to have a hard time if you're just worrying on combat abilities. You're going to have to do some defensive abilities. So later on you're going to want to start leveling up things like your armor, your health. But I like that. I like how you can play the game however you want it, but you feel powerful no matter what, okay? I like the free flow of the movement. Very easy to climb buildings, very easy to jump and hover from building to building. Again, makes you feel like a superhero, makes you feel like Spider-Man. That's the best comparison. You feel like Spider-Man flying throughout the city, and it just is awesome free flow gameplay, okay? I'd like to say the city design is great. When I was on the Empire State Building, it looked like the Empire State Building, and I recognized it. So I definitely liked that, just the design of the city, the fact that it is a nice replica of New York City. I enjoyed that a lot. And the leveling system, I like that, and the amount of side quests, I would like to say, and content. My playthrough, I did do most of the optional side quests regarding, actually let me take that back, I did all of the optional side quests regarding the Blackwater, which is this paramilitary group that's trying to stomp out the infection. In addition to that, I did many of the lair side quests. I found many of the black boxes. I did not do every single one. So I did some of the side content of the game, not all of it, and my playthrough was 12 hours. I'm sure if I had stopped and tried to, actually do every single side mission, what people are saying is the game can be up to 15 hours long. So again, I did enjoy the length of the game, the amount of content in the game. That being said, keep in mind it's a single player only game. There is no multiplayer, there's no replayability there. But when you beat the game, it does become open world, and you can continue on with your side quests, and I do like that as well. So once you beat the game, well, I want to get my money's worth, I want to do all the side quests, the game gives you that ability, and I definitely enjoy that, okay? Some of the places where the game goes wrong. The graphics aren't spectacular. They're good, but they're not spectacular. And there are times when you'll notice a character model that looks kind of shitty. You're going to notice that most of the character models are very generic. They kind of look similar to themselves. I think that's part of the design of the game. Is you're fighting a paramilitary group, of course everyone's going to almost look the same. There's maybe, the infected zombies. There are variety there, but they don't necessarily all look unique, you know what I mean? But what zombie game ever has zombies that all completely look different, you know what I mean? But the graphics aren't anything to write home about. They're just there, okay? The plot, and this is really one of my major complaints. So spoiler alert right now, I'm going to talk about the plot for a minute or two. So I recommend you fast forward And if you don't want to be spoiled with the plot. But the thing that got me is that as you go along the plot of Prototype 2, you do eventually find out that, spoiler alert, Alex Mercer is the villain. Alex Mercer did intentionally create this second infection in New York City, and for what, you find out later on, his reasoning is that he wants to basically create a master race of infected people. Problem being, if you played the first game, it didn't seem like that was going to be his motivation after he stopped the infection in the first game. Like, it's actually weird that in one game, they've basically turned the protagonist hero and made him the antagonist villain without much explanation of what changed him, what put him over the edge to become this really evil guy. And I think that's why at the beginning of the game it's confusing. He actually comes up to you and says, well, I'm not the bad guy, it was Blackwater that did this. They're actually did this infection the second time to test on humans and do research, which actually is kind of true. They are doing human research, but they didn't do the start the infection. Alex Mercer did. And so what is it that put him over the edge? And they never explain it. One other thing that I thought was a little bit disappointing was the ending. I did like the final fight, and I won't spoil it for anyone, the showdown that actually happens between James Heller and Alex Mercer. Let me just put it this way, it's really fun because you get to utilize a lot of the abilities you've used during the course of the game. But the ending is kind of anticlimactic and disappointing. And I think the reason they did it that way is because they definitely wanted to lead into another sequel. They're probably going to definitely make a Prototype 3, but it's just kind of annoying that the ending was like, you're okay, fine, alright, so we overcame the menace, but I think they could have done a better job with the ending of the game and wrapping things up. So, really for me, the positives are the gameplay itself and the amount of gameplay. The negatives, the graphics are kind of so-so, and the game is a little bit repetitive as you go on. Obviously, you're going to be doing the same kind of things over and over. If you're enjoying it, that's not a problem, but I can understand why someone might get bored with it after a little while. And the actual story, not really being clearly written out or making sense why some things are happening. Again, why has this character become, such a villain out of nowhere, and the fact that it's not really fleshed out that much, that is kind of disappointing for me. So, Prototype 2, the best way I can describe it, it's like they took Prototype 1, they flipped the plot a little bit, they added some good, interesting tweaks to the gameplay, trying to keep the gameplay fresh due to the pacing and the speed and pace that you gain new abilities. But I still don't think it's a great game. I think it's a good game for someone who wants to have, 12 to 15 hours of gameplay, of fun combat, but it's not anything to write home about. It's not a unique entry. It's very similar to the first game with the stuff that you're doing. It's a little bit less frustrating than the first game. I do remember particularly in the first game there were certain parts of the game that frustrated the hell out of me, like an annoying mission that was really difficult. I never really came across that in Prototype 2, but at the same time, maybe I was doing the right build with my character. I don't know. Maybe it could have been a lot harder if I'd picked different upgrades than the ones I had picked over the course of the game. But it's a fun game. It's a decent length game for the price tag, and it's still, worth your time. I would say if you're definitely the kind of person who doesn't mind a little bit of repetition, it's worth a buy because you're going to get 15 hours of gameplay out of it. If not, I would say it's at least worth a rent to get in there and experience, the gameplay of it, and then you decide whether or not you want to keep playing it or not. But if you're looking for a super complex story with, really well fleshed out characters and such, you're not really going to get that here. Even though there are some interesting characters, it's not really that complex. It's really more about the action when it comes down to it, and that's where the game actually is pretty good. So, Prototype 2, I like it. It's definitely a fun game. I think it's a great game for a playthrough and to actually play. Like, if you watch the playthrough, you probably want to go play it. But some people will think that it fell short. I think that it fell short of greatness. I think it's a good game. I don't think it's great. And so I'm going to give Prototype 2 a 7.5 out of 10, meaning it's better than average, but it just didn't reach the point where I would give it like an 8 or above, because that I would consider like great. It's, one of the better games of the year. This game just kind of, even though it is one of the better games recently, because there haven't been many retail releases in the past month and a half, it's still just kind of, it's fun, but it's not blowing me away. So, Prototype 2, I give it a 7.5 out of 10. Okay? So that's it for the Hateful Truth video game review series. I hope that you found this informative. I hope now that you know whether or not you'd like to actually go take a shot at Prototype 2. And thanks a lot for sticking in there. Here you get the maximum truth and the minimum bullshit. And I will see you in the next episode of the Hateful Truth. Thanks a lot.